Welcome to the show. I'm so happy you're here. You are going to be so happy you're here. I'm Kim Sorrelle. I'm a writer, I'm a speaker. I get to do so many fun things in life, but my favorite thing to do by far is to meet people. And I get to meet some of the most extraordinary people that walk on the face of this earth. Today, I have Anthony with me. He lives in Rome, one of my favorite cities in the world. And he is the head of like everything in Rome. And he is the head of everything in the leadership in the world. He's brilliant and humble and kind and all of those things wrapped up into one package, which is a rare thing. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited. And he's written a book that is called Love and Suffering. And you know how I love to talk about love. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today is a lot of what Anthony has found in his studies and the things in his book. And so I just want to say I'm so glad that you're here. And Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kim. It's an honor to be on your show. I love what you do, and also really pleased to have read your work about love and feel like wow, there's so much synergy between us. So I appreciate you inviting me on.
Yeah, well, I'm so grateful that you're here. I've so been looking forward to this. So,
Me too.
Anthony, before we dive into all of that, I would love listeners to really get to know you. So, I'd like to hear about 8-year-old Anthony.
Okay, well, 8-year-old Anthony was very different from 58-year-old Anthony, who you're looking at right now. I know I don't look a day over 57, but it's true. So, any rate, well, when I was 8, actually, I was in Washington, D.C. That's where I'm from. And well, my mother was just getting divorced from her second husband and on her way to her third, not shortly after, who was physically abusive. So, I when a man comes into your home, beats you up and sleeps with your mother, you don't feel like much of a person, and that's how I grew up. And I ran away. I slept in parks. It was not an easy childhood. But it's interesting. We'll get into this, I think, in our conversation today. But if you see any humility in me, that's, by the way, about the biggest compliment you could give me. If you see any of that, it's because of the suffering I've experienced. And so I'm actually grateful for it because I think if it weren't for what I went through, I really don't have any doubts I would be I would be having my third affair on my fourth wife, and that's not fortunately what my story is. I'm married to a woman from Mexico. She's a child psychologist, and we have two kids, and we've been married for about 17 years. And I've what I've really tried to do in my work is try to understand, well, what causes people to suffer? What can we do about it? And what's that bridge between suffering and love, which I'm sure we'll talk about today.
Yeah, wow. That's interesting and sad and true. Like, the hardest things that we go through are the things that shape us and form us. And you can kind of look at life and you can go, well, I'm just going to live on the streets for the rest of my life because this is the hand I'm dealt. Or you can say, no, I want to do something else. Like I'm better than the life that I've been forced to live so far. And you obviously chose the latter, but that takes some grit, that takes some strength and bravery because it's not like you were raised knowing you could be this great success. So what is it within you? Was there a teacher, a mentor? Was there somebody in your life ever that said, Anthony, you are made for so much more, or anything that happened in your life that helped you to be where you are today?
Let me try to explain that by way of one of my clients. So because I think her story ties in really well, and actually it's a lot of overlap with my own. And then I'll come back to my own. I'm not trying to escape sharing about myself. Janet was essentially a marketing director in a Fortune 100 pharmaceutical company, and I do leadership coaching. I'm a professor of leadership in Rome and at Luis Business School, and I also have a number of coaching clients. But I used to do a lot more coaching even than I do now. I don't have as much time these days. Well, with Janet, so she contacted me. She wanted to come and see me for executive and life coaching, and what she told me is she says, I have trouble getting out of bed in the morning. That's how much I dread going into work. And I just don't feel it's I'm doing what I was put on this earth to do. And and so taking a psychoanalytic approach, I asked her, well, tell me, how did you grow up? Like, what did you experience in your life? Kind of a similar the question you just asked me. Tell me about 8-year-old Janet. And although I didn't say 8-year-old Janet, but that's more or less what I was trying to get at. And and she said, well, my childhood was really not very good. Was really traumatic, actually. My father passed away from cancer when I was 12, and most of my childhood there wasn't play dates, it wasn't going out, doing things with friends, going to movies. It was really like nurturing my father, my mother and I. That's what we did day in and day out until he passed away when I was 12. So I helped her make a career change. And I always ask people in my conferences, like, what do you think Janet is doing now? And a lot of people will say, well, is she a nurse? And I'll say, no, actually, Janet is the director now of a major hospital. And she's leading teams of doctors and medical researchers to find cures to cancer and other diseases so fewer families suffer the way hers did. And I
Mm.
think the reason I say that, and I'll come back to my own story, is I think when we experience suffering, we have a choice. So that suffering it will naturally convert into anger. And if you look, so I'm working on a book on gender and leadership. And if you look at how men and women handle anger, well, you can't say anything about any individual man or woman or boy or girl, but there are some patterns, so not a blueprint, but there are some patterns for some gender differences around how we manage anger. And more often than not, for men, that anger transmutes into aggression toward others. They externalize it. For women, more often than not, they instead internalize it. That anger, instead of transmuting into aggression, it transmutes into depression, and it goes inward. So that's Janet lying in bed. I can't get out. I don't know what to do with my life, and and so she went through this really difficult times, but eventually, instead of letting that anger naturally, sorry, letting that pain or suffering naturally convert into anger, what I helped her to do is to say, okay, well, you can actually instead transform that suffering into passion. And this is the thing, the word, a lot of people don't know this, but the word passion actually comes from pati or patire in Latin, which means to suffer. So in Christianity, you have the crucifixion, the suffering, the passion of Christ. For example, in African American culture, you have the phoenix rising from the ashes. In many Asian cultures, you have like suffering as the genesis of growth. In many Eastern religions, whichever religious or national cultural tradition you want to look at, most of them have this construct of something beautiful coming from suffering. It's like the Afghan poet Rumi once wrote, "Your wound is where the light enters you." And I
Mm.
think what the reason Janet became so successful as a director of a major hospital is because she could feel that suffering that people go through when there's a terminal illness in the family and they really don't, that uncertainty, that anxiety, not knowing what to do about it. And and so a lot of us, I think, with me it was the same. Like going through all of that physical abuse, I felt like a victim. I felt resentment over and over. I mean, resentment is from re again and sentire, to feel. It's to feel anger again and again and again until you become paralyzed. That's where I was all the way up to my early 30s. I was kind of creating mounds of dust in my career, just didn't have a lot of focus, and wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and had gone, and so from everything that I had gone through, just that anger. I mean, when I was younger, so you asked me about my 8-year-old self. By the time I was 11 or 12, I was getting in fights weekly. I was selling drugs in the streets in Washington, D.C. I was doing all kinds of things I shouldn't have been doing. And this is, I think, a really critical part of my own story is that a family in my neighborhood. So I grew up in Cleveland Park in Washington, D.C., which is a very relatively affluent neighborhood. And there were like three African American families in the neighborhood of thousands at that time. And one of them, the father, Wallace Terry, was the first African American journalist at Time magazine. He covered Vietnam, and he and his two sons kind of took me under their wing. And so when I ran away from home, I'd go to their place, and they became my second family. And that's it's not a coincidence that I'm now married to a Mexican woman, that I'm now living in another culture, because I just became used to interacting with people of other cultures. And at first it was an escape, but later it became just a way of life and something I really, really enjoyed. To make a long story short, having all of that anger inside of me, which became aggression and then also became depression for me. Eventually, I realized that feeling powerless as a young boy in my own home, that what really interested me, what woke me up in the morning, what the kind of contribution I wanted to make in the world is to help others to feel powerful, to access the power that's rightfully theirs. I think most of us cover our eyes with our hands and we weep about the darkness. I want to help people remove their hands and see the light, see the love that's in front of them if they're just willing to open their eyes enough to see it.
Wow. Wow. You said so much there, and it was so good. And you kind of started with you have a choice. You do have a choice to make. And then you kind of ended with you have a choice, to keep your hands where they are and or remove them and see the love in front of you. And uh I'm so grateful always to hear stories about people who bring people under their wing, right? Like, what an incredible family to say, hey, Anthony, your life stinks. We understand that. You're welcome here anytime. When people do that and open that door to somebody, like if you can be that family, you can be that person that just opens your door. You're changing lives in that moment, and your life obviously was very affected by that family, and yeah, the whole different culture thing, and just kind of everything, and where you are, and it kind of took this turn then for leadership. So how did all of that then play into your expertise on leadership?
Well, so when it was finally time to leave home and go up to college, I went from DC. I went to Berkeley, and I would have gone further if I was a better swimmer. Like I wanted to go as far away from all of that as I could. And after graduating from Berkeley, I went into the Peace Corps. So I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Kenya, in a rural town, and being there, I started working on a number of these education projects, and just really felt, again, it was like the first time I was taken in by Wallace Terry's family. The second time was like I was taken in by this community in Kenya, and I felt after 6 months it was the most amazing thing. Like you actually couldn't distinguish skin color anymore. At least I couldn't. It was like before, it was like, oh yes, I'm a white American and I'm in an African, I'm the only one of the only white people in like an African community. But after a while, it was like, no, that's Mwaukesha, and that's Mbogole, and that's and and so this really changed a lot for me. And one thing that I learned was that the only way to do any kind of education or social action project was through relationships. Like really, if you didn't form relationships with people, you couldn't get anything done. A lot of the white American volunteers, and there were also a few African American volunteers there, actually maybe like 7 or 8% of the total. The Among the white volunteers, they would sometimes call Kenya a logic-free zone. That was their sort of disparaging epithet for Kenya. And I used to really resent that, because it to me it just showed that they didn't understand the logic there. The kind of situations people were dealing with and how they managed them. And I just learned that, okay, so for example, I would go working on a school project, and it would be, we had a meeting set up for 10 in the morning, and I would show up at 10 in the morning, and the only one to greet me were like the goats and the cows. It was like totally nobody there. And I would wait, and like an hour later, everybody would show up because there were no cell phones. People couldn't call and say, "Hey, I'm running late," and people were walking long, long distances to come to the meeting. So I just learned after a while, hey, you know what? Just if the meeting's at 10, show up at 11. Right? And then, although it backfired sometimes, Kim, I got to tell you, like there was one time where we had a meeting at 2, and I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to show up at 3, right? But I didn't know the headmaster, which is like the principal of the school, told everyone we got to be on time, right? It was kind of kind of like white people are on time, you got to be on time. Everybody, so people from other countries the Europe, America, they're on time. So everyone, he actually had the foresight to have a meeting beforehand. So everybody been there since like 11 in the morning, and they had to travel long distances to come back. And I thought, well, I'm going to be there. I'm going to get there at 3. But now I was the one who was walking from a long distance on these dirt roads, and I didn't calculate the time right. I got there like at 3:30, and it was like you could have heard a pin drop. Everybody had been waiting for hours, and so yeah, I learned a lot of hard lessons. But when I returned back to Washington D.C. after those years in Africa, it was I guess. I realized like just how cardinal relationships are for anything to happen. And so I got interested in relationships. And then from there, I got interested in leadership because leadership, it turns out, is nothing more than managing relationships toward shared goals. And in fact, if you look in the leadership literature, the most common definition is that leadership's the capacity to mobilize a group of people toward collective objectives. So it's basically managing people toward shared goals. And so that became my interest in it. And actually it was actually kind of also I was very pleasantly surprised that it was okay to come into the field of leadership kind of out of left field, like I did, with all of these crazy ideas about okay, relationships and the importance of just the kind of people we are. I learned that you can't be a leader on the outside until you first become a leader on the inside. And that really, I mean, if you look at, there's been tremendous number of studies. There was one at University of Chicago where they had over 7,000 engineers and they tracked them for over a decade. And they wanted to see, well, which of these engineers are the most successful? Well, the most successful ones, the ones that got the most promotions, the one that made the most money over time, were those who really it wasn't about technical expertise or knowledge of engineering. That was like 14% of their future success. The other 85 plus percent, two things: personal character and socio-emotional abilities. So it was really, and those two are so intertwined, like your personal character and the way you develop relationships with others. If your character is like, oh, I'm going to lie and manipulate and betray, I mean, good luck developing relationships, right? So, so yeah, so the more I got into it, the more I felt like I had a place there, and that actually, like personal development and psychology were really core to leadership. So just fascinated me.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for serving in Peace Corps, first of all. And Kenya, what a cool country. And then to be totally immersed there for 2 years. I can't imagine all the things that you learned and everything that you gleaned. And I spent a lot of time in Haiti, and they kind of call it
Mm.
Haitian time, it's sort of the same
Right.
thing,
They call it African time
yeah,
in Kenya. Yeah, exactly. Because I
right.
also lived in Tanzania since then. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. So it's just kind of the way of life. And then you assimilate to their culture because too often I think Americans go in and go, "Oh, we're the ones that know the way. We're the ones that know what you need and whatever." And it's like, no, they're the ones. It's their country, it's their world, and so you assimilate to them rather than the opposite. But I love what you're saying about leadership and relationship because it's so true. It's one thing that I'm very passionate about is people first leadership, like heart-led leadership. I spoke at the UN about it because we've gotten away from it. It's about systems and processes and strategies and how do you get ahead and how do you make your company grow? uh, people is hardly ever mentioned in the equation. It's all stuff on the computer and on paper and follow these 5 steps. And we've gotten away from relationship. We've gotten away from that. And the most successful leaders I see are the ones that you described when with the study and the engineers. They have great personal character, but they also care about people. They also are people first. And I think there's places I'd love your take on this, Anthony. There's places that are sort of talking about it, like, oh, we got to be people first leaders. We've got to be heart led leaders, but they don't really change anything. It's just words in their mouth because it's an internal thing that you change. It's not another system to become a people first leader or a heart led leader. It's not another 5 step program. It is internal. You have to change you before you can change your leadership.
Well, that's exactly right, Kim. It's kind of like if you want to become a leader, the first step is to take an inner detour and really ask yourself, like, well, why do you want to lead? If because a lot of people, the leaders, oh, I want this our company to become first in market share, or all these other kinds of like, I want to lead like the most massive innovation and blah 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 blah. It's basically what they're saying is, I want to lead because I want to be rewarded for my efforts, as opposed to I want to lead because there's something I really care about that I want to do. And I think I mentioned to you offline, our son is he's 12 and he really loves playing tennis. And we talk about this all the time about, as soon as he starts thinking about winning, then it's all over. He goes into a slump and the match he doesn't do very well. And yet when he just focuses on playing and enjoying it and just using the techniques that he's been developing over the last few years, then he does really well. And I think life is like that for a lot of us, and we tend to focus on what's observable, which is really like the outcomes, the results. Even in dating, okay? So just as an example, so I've coached a lot of people that are dating, single, trying to figure out what to do in their lives, and I always say like, what's important is not what he drives, but what drives him. What's important is not how she looks, but how she looks at you. And I think we're in a society where we're so focused on the external that we kind of forget that all of that's going to go, and it's really the internal. In fact, if you look at studies about like what people are looking for in a partner, there's what's really interesting is that yes, people want looks and they want money and all that kind of thing, but kindness actually trumps all of them.
Mm.
Kindness is way more important than any of those other things. So,
Yeah,
so
that's so interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
because I my husband died a lot of years ago. I was
Oh,
in
I'm
my
sorry.
40s. Oh, well, thank you.
Hmm.
And I've dated a bit since then, and I learned that I stink at it. I'm not very good at it. I stay too long because I feel sorry for somebody or whatever, all the wrong reasons. But if I ever went on a date with somebody and we went and had a meal, if they're not kind to the staff, if they're not, kind to the server, man, I don't ever want to have anything to do with them again. And so you find out pretty quickly, I think, with people, you can, if they are kind or not. And very interesting that trumps all. I like that it does.
Well, and it's interesting, and I think you're very wise, Kim, because the way they treat the server is the way they're going to be treating you in 6 months.
Mm.
That's their process. That's why I always also observe, I'm not really dating because I'm married now, but I'm always observing like, how do people treat people who are serving them? And you can see a lot when you go into a restaurant, you go into a cafe, how is the person you're with, how are they acting towards someone in a service role? And that's the thing, is that the best leaders are just amazingly humble. And that's the thing. I mean, is that they're doing what they're doing because they have a really deeply rooted belief in the dignity of human beings, or maybe of animals if they're doing, or the environment, depending on what they're working toward. But life, and the dignity of sentient beings, let's say. And and this is the thing. This is the thing that's getting lost. Even if we look at, so for example, let's take Sam Walton, who was of course, the CEO of Walmart, the founder. So when he passed away, he was earning $350,000 a year. You're still driving a pickup truck, right? When well, and he refused to take more than that, even though Walmart at the time was the highest grossing, retailer in the world. And then, 10 years after he passed away, I think it was Michael Duke was the CEO. Instead of earning 350,000, was earning 5.4 million. Today, we're seeing a situation where there's essentially, if you look at like how much the CEO earns compared to the average employee in a company. I mean, before it was like 50 times, 60 times more a few decades ago. Now it's approximately 280 times more than the average employee. And so I think that's the thing, is that I think a lot of people are losing their belief in leadership, and that actually there are decent human beings out there that can run organizations and really care about people and really have compassion. And that's I think what we need to change today.
That's so true. That's so true. And, I always think the things that you see in the news, they're in the news because it's a rare happening, right? There's a plane that goes down, there's a whatever it
Hmm.
happens to be, it's because it's a rare happening. And over the years, you hear about the companies that are giving stock to their employees, that are caring so
Hmm.
much about their employees that they get paid better than anybody else in the industry pays. And that the CEO, the owner, the creator of the company, whatever, is just down there with people. And they are in the news because it's rare.
Well, exactly. And that's the interesting thing about the news. It's really novelty that sells, but not just novelty, but also negative novelty. So, the kind of, if it bleeds, it leads. And that's the thing. You don't often read these stories like oh, the like I think it's Senegal's his name, or was his name, the CEO of Costco was giving, 90% of his employees, he's making sure they have health care, or they're earning 40% more than Sam's Club employees, the Walmart, former Walmart franchise. So it's like, whatever it is, we often don't see these positive stories, or like, hey, this wonderful woman in a high school has decided to start a new program to help with after school tutoring. We don't get those stories so much. What we get is just, the negativity, the crises. And I think we have to be careful, especially because, if you look at like a couple 2, 3 decades ago, really you'd get these news kind of once in a while. But now, anyone can just pull out their phone and check and check CNN or BBC or wherever they want to find their, or just on their social media feeds. And it's like this negativity just over and over again, at this sort of digital spigot. Like, literally, if you look on social media and you look at when politicians post a negative post, which is attacking the outgroup, versus an emotionally neutral post, or even a positive post, those negative posts are liked and forwarded at 2.7 times the rate, than those positive or neutral pose. That's a Cambridge University study. So I actually got really intrigued with that. One of my previous books was Screened In: The Art of Living Free in the Digital Age, and I really was looking at like how technology is affecting us. And there's it's not just social media, even like when we communicate through email or texting, and this is really important. Like I have a friend of mine who was doing his a Scottish guy was doing his MBA, and he told me in the 2 years of his MBA, he didn't call another student even once. Every time it was like sending text messages, WhatsApp texts, and so forth. Yeah, outside of the U.S., everyone uses WhatsApp for texting, and I know it's also increasingly in the U.S. too. But so everything was by electronic communication. But then there's a study by Chris Byron, Georgia State University, that when you send an email or text and it's intended to be emotionally positive, it's usually received by the recipient as being emotionally neutral. And when you send an electronic message intending it to be emotionally neutral, it's usually received as being emotionally negative. So there's this downward negative pull over all of our relationships when we communicate that way. And so I often tell people like, use your phone as get ready for this, a phone, and just and call people, right? Like it's like actually there's a number of studies, a lot of them showing that the human voice is really the transmitter of connection, and that actually video, like seeing someone doesn't add a whole lot to the connection you feel. Maybe in the beginning, if you haven't seen them for a long time, like on a FaceTime or a video call, but after a few minutes, it doesn't incrementally add more connection. It's really the human voice, like whereas textual communication, there for example, there's a study on dehumanization, and that when we for example, if you take someone and you show them a speech by someone of an opposite political party or who supports the opposite political party, if they're hearing the speech, they don't tend to dehumanize the speaker, but when they read it textually, they do. So this is, I think, if we want to have more love and more peace and more connection in today's world, it's just, I think it's important. We need to talk with each other. For in person is best, and if not, by phone.
A phone is a phone. That's enough.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's so interesting. And connection is so important. I don't know if you've seen the documentary on the blue zones, but where they went and
Mhm.
studied areas, why are these people living longer than everybody else? And you think it could be diet or exercise or something like that, or genetics. And it came down to connection and purpose. And that's why they're living longer. And without connection, you die sooner. I mean, it's just a fact. And connection is so important. And there's a thing that I read recently about men in the US. The average man in the United States has zero point 0.7 friends, which is a sad number,
Mm.
a sad number.
Very
Women,
sad.
we tend to have more friends. Men, for whatever reason, just connection. And then if you retire and the people you were connected with are the people that you were working with and you no longer have them, then how do you connect? What's your way to connect? And you need to put yourself out there. Connection is just so vital. It feeds our soul, being with other people and being around other people, and you feel their energy, and it's not just their words. It's so much more than that when you're in person. And so coming up with ways to connect and figuring out ways to connect, I think is vital in our world today.
Let's so when I used to run an organization, and one of our board members who he used to run Apple in India and China, when he liked something that I said, he'd say, let me double click on that, Anthony, right? So let me double click on what you just said, Kim. I think it's so important, really, probably the most important thing that we've mentioned so far in our conversation, what you just said. So the blue zones, the idea of like the people are living longer when they're experiencing like real-time social connection. So psychologists don't agree on a lot, but one of the only things they do agree on is that the most critical ingredient for long-term well-being is social connection. So there was, Robert Waldinger, the Grant study at longest study of adult development at Harvard found that the this was a study of men, and, and which we'll come to that in a sec about gender differences, but it found that the men who in their older age who were happy, the happiest elderly men were those who had the closest, most meaningful relationships with friends in their middle age. So social connection is really like the closest to a panacea. So that's one thing I write about in Love and Suffering is like really, I call it the interpersonal panacea for long-term happiness is social connection. The intrapersonal, meaning within us, panacea for long-term well-being is gratitude. So I've got a whole section on gratitude because when we appreciate what we have, we tend to feel happier, especially if we make that a habit. So it's not just happiness, also it's success. It's so we talked about leadership. All the leadership theorists, and one of the only things they agree on is that social connection, relationships, is the key ingredient for leadership success. So whether you want to be successful in your life or happy, or most people want to be both, it's all about relationships. Now let's go to what you were just sharing about men. The average man has 0.7 friends. So this actually, to put that in context, there was a study by Matthew Brashears at Cornell found that in 1985, for American adults, men or women, that on average they had three close friends. And by 2004, this is right after the social networking sites like Facebook, Twitter, and such had emerged. By 2004, that number had gone down from three to two close friends. Today, average man has 0.7 friends. This is a problem. This is a huge problem. So women, as you said, tend to have close friends. What men tend to have is so while women tend to have close friends, men tend to have their wives' close friends' husbands. And
Mm.
that's something different, right? That's it's kind of like, oh, Joe, Joe, meet Fred. Like Fred also likes baseball and he likes barbecuing burgers too. And it's just like it's almost insulting because, but at the same time, they're just these guys who just have so little friendships, social resources in their life that they're kind of like take what they can get. But this is, I think, a big part of this is that men tend to focus on what I call the five PRs to the exclusion of everything else in their lives. The five PRs is to procreate, to produce, to provide, to protect, and to prove themselves to others. And that's what us guys tend to focus almost all of our waking hours on, right? Procreate, produce, provide, protect, and to prove that we are worthy. And this is the problem with this is that if you look at, okay, for example, Antonucci is a researcher, and she and her a very large research team, they on the eastern coast of the U.S., they did all this research on what are called social convoys. So, as you know, like a physical convoy, like a convoy of SUVs or vehicles, these are the vehicles that travel with you through travel together as they're going forward. Well, social convoys are the close relationships that travel with you through life. And if you compare the social convoys of women versus men, let me tell you, for all you listeners, all you male listeners out there, you guys, it's not looking good. Like really, for example, if a couple is divorced and they have adult children, the the woman will almost always be in that social convoy of her adult children. She'll still be a very core member. The guy, sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, I love to sing, Kim. So I went out last night and I'm at this karaoke bar and I'm hanging out and I ended up in this long conversation with this guy who's I think he's about 67 and he's getting his second divorce and he's saying that like yeah his kids ever since his first marriage they won't talk with him. Now, we didn't get into like he didn't really want to go into it about why that all happened, but he hasn't hadn't talked to his kids for the last 12 years. And I think while I don't know the details of that situation, I do know for a lot of men, it's often like it's kind of like that Harry Chapin song Cats in the Cradle. Men focus on their careers and and when their children are growing up, they're just too busy. And then when they become older and they need those kids are too busy. They're kind of returning the favor. So it's really, really not a good situation.
Yeah, it's so interesting that that is the situation. Like I don't, and the 1985 to 2004, I mean, that's a huge drop in a short amount of time. And so there are distractions and things that are in life that are keeping us away from really connecting with people. And it is so vital because at some point in time, your kids are going to be grown up and they are going to have families of their own. And so if that's your only focus while you're raising kids and you don't develop any relationships out of that, man, I mean that's why women go into crisis after they're empty nesters. You know, I mean it can be such a tough time if you're not connected, if you don't have times that you're connecting with your spouse and connecting with other people. And it's so interesting that you mentioned men, their friends tend to be the husbands of the wife's friends. And it is a totally different friendship. It's almost a friendship out of convenience because you
Hmm.
happen to be going to dinner together or somebody's having a party or whatever it happens to be. And I think too, we take connection away from people. Like I told you, I lost my husband, and 80% of widows lose 80% of their friends. And it's because they were couple friends, probably. And now you're
Hmm.
the fifth wheel. So you're no longer invited to things. 80% of widows leave their church because they no longer feel welcome in this place that they used to go every Sunday. Like 80% gain 15 pounds. Like poor widows, holy cow. I mean, it's
Mm.
like strike against you, strike against you, strike against you. But then you figure it out. You figure out, well, then who is my community now? You know, who are my people now? Like talking about retirement, and a man retires and loses connection with all those people at work. Well, how are you going to find community now? How are you going to find friends that are real friends or connect with somebody from your past or whatever? What are your
Mhm.
recommendations for that?
Well, okay, so let me share some recommendations, but first, let me say, are you aware that the leading cause of death for men 45 and over in the UK now is suicide? The In the US also there's this massive increase of deaths of despair like alcoholism, drug use, and so, meth and so forth. And also if you look at like Carl Pillimer's research at Cornell, he has this he basically goes up and interviews seniors that are in their 70s, 80s, even up to centenarians. And he asks them like, "Hey, what would you do differently if you could live your life over?" And what tends to happen is that the elderly men that he interviews, they say, "Well, I would have spent more time with my family and not worked so much." And then the older women that he interviews, they instead tend to say, I wish I'd been more authentic and taken care of my own needs. And, I also count. And I didn't really understand that for most of my life. So there's this real sense that for men, it's about I wish I'd been more compassionate. So when they're focused on the five PRs, right? To procreate, produce, provide, protect, to prove themselves, what they're missing is compassion, commiseration, community, connection. And that's what they most regret. Whereas with women, it's like saying, well, I was taking care of everyone all the time. I mean, there's a study with like Pew Research Center time use data, and what they do is they look at adult men and women in the US and how they spend their time differently. And what they found is that if you have, for example, a fully employed woman and her husband is unemployed, that husband is doing like, so this would be the question, like, is he doing more childcare and housework than she is? And fortunately, the answer is yes, he's doing 6 hours more per week e- for taking care of the kids and housework at home. And so She's working all day, he's at home all day, he's doing 6 hours more per week. Now you switch roles. You've got a fully employed man and an unemployed wife. How many hours more is she doing of housework and childcare? 46 more hours per week. So there's a 750% difference there. That's how much gender inequity we still have. We talk about all this gender fluidity, gender enlightenment, but we're still in the dark ages. It's still where women are taking the are really taking on the brunt of housework and childcare, not feeling they're thanked for it, not appreciated. There's a study just came out recently that actually gratitude has even more of an effect on women than men often because they feel like they're so taken for granted. In fact, what I found in the research I'm doing on gender and leadership is that for a lot of women, guys tend to be very stressed in the office more so than women. Women are less stressed, and the reason going through all of these studies and meta-analyses, what I found, the reason that women tend to be less stressed than men in the workplace, because coming into work is like a break. Coming into the office is like, basically the other shift at home is harder. And so they come into the office and it's actually a little more relaxing than having like, they're taking care of their kids. They're even, cooking for their husbands. I even know couples where they don't have children and the woman is working until 8 p.m. and she's exhausted. And I ask her, why are you so tired? And she goes, well, I got to go home and cook. And then she goes like this. She goes, I go, wow, that's a lot. And she goes, yeah, but who else is going to do it? Right? So her husband's coming home, but he's not cooking. And so this is, I think a lot of this has to change. So, uh, and then, interesting, you said yourself being a widow and how you experience it. About 80% of widows are kind of more shut out of social groups. Well, there's some interesting study that found that if you compare a man and a woman at 60 years old, and each one loses their partner, so their partner passes away, the chances of that woman living another year are much higher than that man living another year. So as bad as it is for widows, I think for a lot of men, it's kind of like, you know, I mean, for a lot of women, it's like, okay, their husband passes away. It's like, okay, this is tragic. This is horrible. Okay, time to call up the girlfriends. And there's that much not, this is more, again, this is more of let's say like a pattern than it is a broad stroke. Like it's not true for every woman who's a widow but if you look on average with large samples is what you find that they're much more supported, women are. Whereas for a guy at 60 years old, his wife passes away and it's just he's isolated. Like his friends, like he ceded the social coordination of their social lives to his wife and never really and so why don't guys do this? And I think before we get into strategies, why is it that we guys cannot go out and just say hello to another guy? Hey, tell me where you're from. So just what I just said. Imagine like for you guys out there going up to a guy you don't know, hey, so where are you from? Okay, are you starting to get uncomfortable right now? Because almost all guys become uncomfortable as soon as I say that because it's like, okay, are other men going to think if you do that you're weak, you're dependent, you're insufficient on your own? Are you hitting on them? So this is the thing. It's like women can go to the bathroom together in a restaurant. Guys can't. Like when I lived in Africa, it was really hard to get used to that some of my other male friends would just like grab my hand and walk down the street. And I was like, okay, right? But it's different custom. But we tend to be so homophobic in U.S. society, and so like we all, men and women alike, we subscribe to this belief that men should focus on those five PRs, right? Procreate, produce, provide, protect, prove themselves. And like let's take what's going on, for example, in Ukraine. Okay, so Zelensky, as soon as the Russian invasion happens, he says, "Okay, men are not allowed to leave the country. They're going to fight for their sovereign nation, and women and children, you all can leave." And even if you look in feminist circles, almost nowhere do I see anyone challenging that decision. And I'll tell you, right here in Rome, we have a lot of Ukrainian friends, and they're all women and children. And these kids miss their dads and back who are still back in Ukraine. And this is the way the world is, and we don't question it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. You're absolutely right. We don't question it. And you kind of wonder why. I mean, it seems obvious, an obvious thing to question. And you talked about going to work and compared to not going to work and how many hours somebody's doing whatever. And when I had little kids, I can tell you it was way easier to go to work than it was to stay home. Way easier. And because you do get a break and for a whole bunch of reasons. But that was so much simpler, so much easier. And yeah, so um, wow,
Can I ask you, Kim,
yeah.
why did it feel easier for you to go to work than to stay home? And what advice would you give to men out there who want to be more supportive? They want to be allies for their wives and for the women in their lives. What made it so hard for you, and what could we do better?
That's a great question. And I'll tell you a little story, actually. Um, my husband was wonderful. We had a great relationship, but he took out the trash and mowed the lawn. Like that was it. And once in a while, I'd say, "Honey, can you do the dishes?" Or "Why don't you ever help with the dishes?" And he'd say, I do the dishes." Well, that meant emptying the dishwasher once a month. And so it he didn't look at things the same, probably because the way he was raised, his mom did it all and his dad did nothing. I think it just kind of passes down that that's what you think your role is. And as much as people want to break out of gender roles are for real. And I coached and I worked full time and I had four kids and there was, pile after pile of things that I was responsible for. And I got to the end of my rope and I said, "Honey, you got to do something." The two hardest things for me were keeping up with laundry and cooking dinner every night. Those were the two hardest things. If a man steps in and does either one of those things or both, that's huge. That's huge. And so I told him, "You got to pick one. You got to pick one." And so he said he'd do the laundry. And I said, "Okay." So I held him to it. And after I ran out of underwear, I went to Victoria's Secret and bought some more. And then I ran out again and bought some more. But I wasn't going to touch the laundry because he said he would do it. And the first thing he did, very male, is
You, you, you must have had a lot of underwear after a few months.
I did. It's absolutely true. But the first thing he did is he threw away every sock in the house. And he went to Sam's Club or Costco somewhere and he bought 12 packages of 12 pairs of athletic socks. So he had all these socks all matching. And I have boys. And so the heel of the sock was halfway up my calf. Like the socks didn't really work for me, but
Oh my God.
I wasn't doing laundry. So I was cool with it because I wasn't doing laundry. And after a while, the socks started turning pink because he didn't understand really separating the laundry, whatever. And then what he did that his friends, by the way, thought he was a genius. The sock thing, he thought was a genius because why do you want to match socks? Like that's the smartest thing you can do. Just have
Hmm.
all the same sock. And then his men friends thought he was a genius because he taught the kids how to do their own laundry. So he no longer had to do the laundry because the kids were all doing their own. And so uh, laundry and dinner, I guess, is the short answer to your question. That
Uh-huh.
those are big ways a man could step up and help.
Wow, wow, Kim, that's really poignant. So I got to say, for all your male listeners out there, so this tendency, like women feel, men fix, that men don't really manage emotions, which include the children, right? They manage like fixing things, and that's their role. I think what we have to see is that that's not enough for our women. We need to do more, and and that actually it's not enough for us because as we're seeing from these statistics about what happens to men later in age, like we become isolated. We become pushed out of the social group and we don't survive. So I think what we need to do is we need to question like, well, what does it mean to be masculine? I think that we can be masculine. We can be a guy without having to just focus on competing and dominating other guys, but we can also be compassionate. We can be connecting. We can be, and you see this like when you look at men and you look at like earlier on in their lives, most guys that I know back when they were in in elementary school and high school, they had really close male friends where they'd talk about everything and spend a ton of time together. And then somehow those five PRs kick in as soon as they set foot at university, and at least by their second or third year. And then it's about career. And then I literally had a group of friends where we were super close in high school and from before. And I was traveling in Nepal, and I wrote this like long email to all of them right there because it was a group of about eight of us, and I said, you know what? Why is it that we were together like at least three times a week back when we were in high school, and now it's been over 10 years, we haven't even been in the same room together once.
Yeah.
Can we do something about that? And that became the genesis of like an annual beach trip for the guys that still goes on. And and I think like we have to realize that, hey, calling an old friend, hey, how have you been? I want to catch up with you. Saying hello to someone you don't know, that it's okay if it feels safe, just go for it. And the fact is, in fact, there's been a number of studies about talking to strangers that have found that most people don't do it because they fear rejection if they do it. And what they found is that almost no one rejects because especially other guys, they're so lonely today. I mean, you're kind of offering them oxygen that you want to go up and have a conversation with them, ask them about themselves. And I think part of it too is just as I shared before about, it's not what he drives, it's what drives him. When we're choosing friends, instead of being like, okay, because a lot of guys, the friends they'll choose are the ones that are going to help them to to be even more successful in their work. There's a lot of studies about that. Instead, if we start saying, who are the guys I know in my life that I don't really call, but they're really kind of kind people? And maybe they're not going to help me advance in my career, but they seem to genuinely be authentic and they actually listen when I talk with them, and maybe reevaluate how we approach and consider friendships with other guys because it really doesn't have to be this way. It just doesn't.
Yeah, yeah, so true, so true. And connecting back, I mean, that's probably the easiest place to start is walking up to somebody and talking to them, do it, do it, do it, do it. The more you do it, the more you practice at it, the better you're going to get at it, the more comfortable you're going to feel. But if you think about your past and think about high school or college and who were your buddies, who were your friends, and what are they doing now? And reconnecting with them uh, is an easy first approach, right? Because you already know them. So you already have some history, and that history runs deep. Like I've got a core group of friends from high school, and we get together once a year, like you do, but we also talk in between, and some of us see each other in between, and we share stories. We share so much history that those relationships are my deepest relationships because we share that because there's
Mhm.
so much to that. So, I think it can be either way, like reach out to people in your past and walk up to strangers and figure out, who is it that you've met that you've really admired and liked and think that you can be good friends with or would be a good friend. Like put yourself out there and do those things and connect and live longer and happier. It's
You know, exactly. And I got to tell you this funny story, Kim, which is that when I was living in Claremont, California, and I was teaching at Claremont McKenna and Cal State before I came over to Luis Business School in Rome. And when I was living there, I decided, okay, I'm going to form a men's group where because I'm doing all this research, I didn't I don't know if I didn't I don't know if you know this, but I'm with Sarah Wright in New Zealand. She and I are the two leading researchers in the world now on loneliness in organizations. So I'm doing all this research on loneliness. I'm like, you know what? I need more friends. I'm going to form this men's group. And so I get this other guy, and he and I together kind of co-found the men's group. And for 4 months, we're planning it, and we end up with like 10 guys. And once a month, we have like this sort of revolving potluck dinner at different at the houses of the different guys. And and by the way, just a very like important point here. If you're getting a men's group together, you got to explain to guys like, okay, we're doing a potluck dinner. Like a bag of chips does not count as a dish, right?
Yeah.
Like a six pack is not a dish for the potluck dinner, right? So anyway, but besides the food, which mostly came from Trader Joe's, we ended up like really connecting. This went on for like 3 years, and it took us about 4 months to get it together, and it was really rewarding and fulfilling for us. And my wife saw this, and she had actually done something similar before when we lived in Barcelona. And she said, "Okay, well, I think I'm going to do this too." So I kid you not, Kim, she makes a few phone calls, sends a few text messages. The next morning, there are 14 women sitting in a circle in our backyard. So it's harder for us guys to do it, but it's not impossible. And and really, I mean, this is probably the greatest investment you can make in your future, besides spending time with your kids. So make the time and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so important. And, something that I'm working on, sorry, Anthony,
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
whatever. Um, I'm working with a group of 5 men who recognize this. The connection is something that is missing, and also recognize that the wisest people in the world are the oldest people in the world. But they often feel lonely and kind of rejected by society and things that aren't good. And so creating community for those people is vital, like figuring out a way to create community and at the same time use the knowledge, their gained knowledge that they have throughout their life and their wisdom to mentor younger people. So then you have community and then you have purpose, both built in together. And so we're launching it this year. We're getting it all figured out, and we want it to be a worldwide thing. And the guys that I'm working with are geniuses,
Hmm.
and so it can be. But I'm the only woman on our little committee, and the way the men look at it and approach it way different than I do. And it's so it's
How is it different? What do they do that's different from
well,
the
I
way
mean,
you do it as a woman?
we have to have this strategy and we have to do these steps and we have to, make it happen this
Hmm.
way, right? The things that they know. I mean, they're CEOs of gigantic companies and whatever. And so they're bad. And I'm like leading with heart, like, well, shoot,
Hmm.
what can they share? Like, what do they want to do together and bring them around a shared goal? And hey, we can just make them happy. I mean, whatever it is, we just come from two totally different places. And so I think that's the reason I'm on the committee is that
Sounds like they need
I bring
you.
something, I bring
Well,
something else. Yeah.
Well, this is extremely common. Like even so, like Michael Dell, for example, I know a guy who pitched to Michael Dell for an idea for a company, and he said that it was the worst meeting of his life because it was a 10-minute meeting, and within the first 30 seconds, he could see through Michael Dell's nonverbals that Dell had no interest whatsoever in him or anything he was doing, and he had to like sit there and squirm through the other 9 minutes. And so Dell had the sense to he hired a woman as chief operating officer, and because he understood that he was focused more on the strategy, as you said, strategy, goals, and and that he needed someone to kind of hold the house together, and that was a woman. There's an interesting study, an ethnographic study of this small town in northern England, and they found that without any variation, if you looked at who washed the windows of the houses, the husbands always washed the outsides of the windows, and the wives always washed the insides of the windows. And I think still, even today, in 2026, we have these kinds of gender differences where, men are about, they say like men teach and women tend, So men are focused on like, okay, the how do we go forward as a group, strategies and so forth. And women are like, well, how do we create a harmonious group where people care about each other, where there's a sense of community? And I think what I've found is that if you look at men and women over the lifespan, and there's a lot of research that supports this, men actually tend to become more empathetic over time as they get older, and women tend to become more assertive over time as they grow older. And so there's this really, I mean, I think for each of your listeners, you could ask yourself, okay, do I focus more on empathy or do I focus on being authentic or assertive? And the chances are, if you, and this is what I've seen from coaching thousands of leaders, if you focus all the time on empathy, well, be careful. If you take that to an extreme, you become like a doormat for others. If you focus all the time on being authentic, again, be careful because others will perceive you as being aggressive, narcissistic, toxic. There's really this equilibrium that each of us needs to find, and and that's what the studies of elderly people by Pillemer found is really like guys are like, I wish I'd been more empathetic. Women are like, I wish I'd been more assertive or authentic. I think each of us needs to find this kind of moving target between empathy and assertiveness and finding a way that we can integrate both into our lives. And what I found is that when people do that, those are the people that end up becoming the most effective leaders because they know how to listen with compassion and they also know how to speak resolutely toward what they believe in.
Yeah. Wow. You just said so much. And I think everything that you said is so valid. And if people just listen to that and because things can change. The reality is things can change. And but you have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to be part of the change for things to be different than they are. And so uh I think that's why there's men and women. We can
Well,
help each other out, right?
we got to learn from each other. So we have to say that, hey, I mean, I really think what we call feminine is mostly just being human, like being a good human being, being kind. All this studies show that women tend to be better friends than men. They tend to be kinder than men. They help others more. So, where there's also this difference where women tend to when they help others, it tends to be more in an intimate one-on-one setting, whereas men tend to help others more in a group setting. So women tend to focus more on sociality. I'm sorry, on intimacy, and men tend to focus on sociality. Like if you see like who's the hero who's going to like dive into an icy river to save someone, it's more likely a guy. Like that's like, okay, the group, something's not working right with the group. Here's someone who's hurt. I need to go help them. Whereas when it comes to like, okay, well, who's going to go and pick up an elderly parent or take a child to school or make sure that they have their lunch packed or bring let's say some home cooked food to someone who's just lost someone they love. It's women. So I think really all of these gender prescriptions they constrain us. And I think the more comfortable we are with who we are, the more we can say, hey, you know what? I don't need to just be subscribed to just the male way of doing things or the female way of doing things. I can integrate both into into like a cohesive communication style, leadership style, way of interacting with others. And what you rapidly find is that like for is that when you show compassion, studies by Richard Boyatzis have found that when leaders express compassion, they actually become less stressed, right? Because they're actually feeling what others feel. It actually it's the vagus nerve. It relaxes you. So we all can do that, and I think the more comfortable we are with ourselves, the more we say, okay, yeah, I'm a guy or I'm a woman, but I don't need to adhere, 100% to the stereotype. I can go beyond that and think about how do I want to show up in relationships and in society.
Wow. Yeah. So good. So good. And unfortunately, we're out of time. I feel so bad about that because I could talk to you and talk to you and talk to you, and we really haven't gotten into love, even though love is
Yeah, I know,
your
because we both
umbrella,
written
right?
books about love, and we haven't. Well,
I
let
know.
me Well, can I offer two free books
Yeah.
to your
Yes,
listeners?
please.
And actually what you said about this group you're forming with these CEOs around how friendship can really be centered around meaning and helping others and making an impact. So one of the books is called The Myth of Friendship, How Your Misunderstandings About Friendship Keep You Lonely. And there's a chapter about that. And then the other book is The Myth of Happiness, How Your Definition of Happiness Creates Your Unhappiness. So, okay, so for your listeners, it's super easy, okay? You go, so The Art of Living Free is the learning platform of an organization I run called the Center for Social Leadership. And theartoflivingfree.org is the website. So you go to theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. Again, theartoflivingfree.org/free happiness and friendship books. You go there, you put in your email, you'll get a confirmation email in your inbox, you confirm it, and you get the download links. So I got to say, Kim, we got to do this again at some point because we got to talk about love also. And you're a wonderful host and feel like a real synergy with you. So thanks for inviting me on your show.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me. And I'm going to hold you to that because I would love to get together again and talk about love because your insights are just invaluable. I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure. It's been an honor.
Yeah. Well, and thank you everybody for joining us. If you know somebody that would be helped by this episode, pass it on. Like I can think of people that I want to call right now and say, "Oh, you got to hear this," whatever, because help each other out, right? And so pass the episode on. And I just want to say that until we see each other again, I pray that you keep your heart open and you live your love loud.